to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in games, how they work, why they work, and why we love them. I am Muxl.
I'm Gerg.
And we are back to, as promised, discuss Fortnite, some Anthem, and just some general trends in first-person shooters and just popular gaming, basically. It's going to get a little broad probably toward the end, but we're going to revisit some old ideas about large-scale games, I guess I'll say, because technically Fortnite is not an MMO in any sense. It is...
For those of you at home who couldn't see Mark put his fingers up, I'm not sure if that came through the mic, but he did put up his fingers.
Having 100 people play in a single arena back when the term MMO was being coined,
that's a good point.
Might have felt a lot like an MMO.
Kind of count as massive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. I mean, now MMOs have thousands of players, but...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even the early WoW raids were 40 people together. So that's, 40% of 100. It's 40% of MMO.
That is what percent means for people who didn't know that. Yep. There you go. See, I get to give it back to you. It
comes from the Roman decimation, which
means to kill every 10th man.
Yeah, that was real. Do you know?
I know.
That's insane. I recently found that out and was reading about it, and I was like, "This is Wikipedia. This isn't some weird, crappy, did you know fact book."
Oh no!
I was like, "Oh Lord, they actually did that."
Yeah.
So. Good thing we're not Romans.
So if you're a Roman soldier, don't screw it up for the rest of us.
For all you Romans out there. Okay. We kind of on the tail of last week, we were talking about a game that can simultaneously do multiple things, basically, and how there is something potentially to the playability of a game that allows you to do multiple different things in the same space, particularly when it comes to the battle royales. We kind of identified potentially that Fortnite had some ability to be played in the exact same game mode, the exact same lobby, the exact same time, in radically different ways. Yeah. And that could have very well lead to the just staggering level of or even strata of different types of players who come and play it, from casual to competitive to tryhards to kids to... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird because we got
horses.
Maybe horses. We got there through talking about learning and just how long you have to play a game to get better at it, or is that how you get better at it?
Right.
But we ended up in this weird place where the game was able to appeal to two very different types of audiences who wanted to do different kinds of learning, I guess you want to call it that. They wanted to just have different experiences inside of the same game.
Which we contrasted with Apex Legends, which you might... eat our words a little bit, considering that they just hit the 50 million player mark earlier this week, which is staggering. And congratulations to them. Also, I've said on record before, I loved Titanfall, the original one. I actually didn't play the second one, but because I didn't have a system at the time. But I've actually played a lot of the original Titanfall, and it was by far my favorite of modern FPSs that I really got into. So I'm super happy for Respawn for finally kind of getting some of the popular recognition I think that team has deserved for a long time. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the Fortnite differentiation, we were wondering if that was going to last.
Yeah.
If it's not just the new flashiest
thing
that brought a little bit of Overwatch into it, in terms of, the character classes and not even customizability, but
the different powers.
Just powers and having an ult that charges. Mm-hmm. It really does feel like a combo kind of team shooter battle royale.
Yeah. You're forced to pair up with people. Mm-hmm. So we hypothesized, and we did this hypothesis before we actually played Apex, which we have done now. We did that directly after the stream, but
shocker.
Hypothesized that Apex Legends will have a hard time attracting the dual player base of Fortnite if the hypothesis that Fortnite is driven by this engine of players who are coming for the loot and the perks and the status and the really social cred from the game.
Right.
And people who are coming for the competition and I guess a different kind of reputation that comes from being really good. They want to have the skill. They want to be on top. And that actually these two groups of people exist within every match and they actually feed on each other.
Yeah.
So that's a hypothesis for why Fortnite is doing so well.
Mark, I forgot. Before we go any farther, we forgot about the third giant battle royale game out there. You know what I'm talking about, right? Go on. It's Fortnite, Apex Legends, and...
PUBG.
No, Tetris Battle Royale.
Oh my gosh.
Tetris Royale. Tetris 99, bitches. God. Xander and I played that last week.
Did you really?
I was laughing at the concept for a while. It was actually kind of fun. Basically, play a Tetris game with 100 other people at once. And most of the screens, your Tetris. And I'm actually still a little bit unclear on the specifics because there's absolutely no tutorial or any instruction on the game. But if you do what you can, like, target other players.
Yeah.
And if you do better, then you can hurt them, basically. And then you can be attacked in turn, and it'll cause, extra rows to come up, like unsolved rows to come up under you as you're going. So yeah, if you just want to keep that in the back of your mind for this whole thing.
Okay.
I was just thinking about the Titans are the really next up-and-comings things that are going to be unseating. Tetris 99.
Jeez.
And I also unironically actually had a good time playing.
It seems like fun.
It's also because Tetris is just fun. Yeah. But there's something like both times when, because you can like quit out, right? Both times when I think we played like 4 games, Sandra and I, and every time when we lost, we stuck around to like watch who won. But it felt more like betting on the ponies.
Yeah.
Like, we just both arbitrarily picked someone and we're rooting for them. And again, like, the UI is so obtuse and so that it's very unclear why anyone is doing well. Or if someone's doing well, they very well could lose, like, almost instantly, too. Right. There's very little, like, oh, that guy's not doing too great. It was basically random selecting a winner.
Interesting.
So
that's like an example of another sub-game that sort of pops up inside of a Battle Royale game. And it could just be that, like, Battle Royale games they naturally sort of allow for the formation of these sub-games. And
yeah. I mean, I was more just laughing at the desperate cash grab that everyone's like, where can we shove Battle Royale? I had the idea.
Tetris.
Dude, Battle Royale asteroids. You're in a giant asteroid, and there's 100 ships in the exact same way.
And they gotta head toward the center of the map.
Yeah. Or no, not even, but yeah, just all the asteroids are coming in. You know how they go smaller and faster every time you shoot them. And whoever survives the longest wins. I mean, currently as asteroids set up, that would be like instantaneous. Everyone would die. Right. Like the second everyone shot one, it would go everywhere.
Yeah.
But you can do a version of that where like you're just survive, and then like there could be some strategy in terms of like shooting something in a way that you're trying to hit someone else with while still trying to survive yourself.
Interesting.
I think that could be cool.
Do not take our idea, guys. Anyway, I was going somewhere with this before. Well, so I was talking about how Fortnite needs to be driven by this dual engine player base.
And nothing about Tetris 99 though.
Okay. And Apex Legends it doesn't seem to have the same dual player base, right? They don't have the same amount of like dances and costumes and things you can unlock. You can't be a banana. You can't, which apparently is a thing in Fortnite. You can be a muscular banana.
It's the best kind.
So you can't kind of have this just loot grabby, I want to die sort of mentality. And it makes sense to me why, because imagine being on a team with that person, right? That's going to suck. So
yeah, that's a good point.
You actually don't want an asymmetric player base if you're Apex Legends, because what you're going to do is match up people who might not have the same interests, and then they're going to end up not liking each other and consequently not liking the game if that happens enough times.
Yeah, there's no singles, right?
Nope, there's no way to play single player on Apex Legends.
Yep,
people have been wanting a solo queue, which is interesting, and I think
it surprised me.
This might be part of the reason. Is either people feel held back by their teammates, or people they aren't as interested in like killing and winning as they are, again, sort of exploring and messing around.
I think even just bigger than that, again, just hypothesizing, it's just the feeling of freedom that you get from a Battle Royale game. I remember that was one thing that was so crazy about it when it was kind of first rearing its head with PUBG, was like you'd ask, like, what are the rules? And it was so simple. Like, just 100 people drop in, and whoever survives. Mm-hmm. Like, that's it. Like, there was no, like, huge... It was very simple in the amount of freedom that you had. And obviously a meta developed, and that's how that works. But I do wonder if just the being chained to a squad, even if that is the way the game is like balance is supposed to be played, or is just inherently, if part of the appeal of a battle royale by itself is that like kind of you against the world mentality, and just literally not even having the option for that grates on people. Yeah, on top of all the things you were saying in terms of the further. It seems like maybe even a psychological thing as opposed to a systemic thing, which people know what they want, and it involves solo queue. It's more just like, no, give me solo queue, because that's like the heart of Battle Royale a little bit. Yeah. Is being able to load in by myself. As well as Apex Legends, as we've also said, seems to be far more geared towards competitive people. Mm-hmm. And I could definitely see, obviously the less variables you need to control in the form of crappy teammates, the best player wins, right? In a true solo queue. So it seems there's a lot of pieces that would push people towards that. Right. And I think it really does is going to depend on the support that Respawn gives it and the direction they take it. Because, I mean, Fortnite didn't pop up like this, right?
No, it didn't. It's been refined.
And built and has continually been added, but it has been a really active part of the developers, which kind of brings me into... Did you have somewhere else to go?
Well, I just wanted to make an aside to, like, this splitting of the player base that we're talking about, people who want solo queue, people who want to play competitively, it's not a small thing.
Right.
Like, it's one of the things that is the biggest bugaboo for Blizzard and Overwatch right now, is the fact that they're trying to, and they have been for a long time, is they're trying to make everybody happy. They attracted such a large group of players, but it feels like they can only keep one of them.
Right.
And they're sort of slowly disappointing the other one.
Right.
And so, or they're just making both mildly unhappy. Like, that, it feels like they get to pick their poison.
Right.
And the brilliant thing about the way Fortnite is structured is that you can have the casual players have a good time, and the competitive players have a good time, and it isn't just that they don't get in each other's way, they actually foster each other.
Right.
And that's amazing. And so that's why I'm hesitant to say that Apex can dethrone Fortnite, because it doesn't feel like they've solved that core problem of what do you do with the competitive people and the casual people, and how can they not just play together, but like actually improve each other's experience.
Right, that like symbiosis we were talking about, that literally each one actually improves both.
Right.
And like the answer that Overwatch has been just separating the modes between competitive and quick play.
Right.
But that is also, it's fraught with problems, which we've probably discussed before. And also kind of brings in the really, I think, remarkable achievement, like we've talked about with Battle Royales, is just, again, literally having the exact same game space and time and mode, being able to cater to such wildly different people is pretty remarkable, actually.
Yeah.
So, in any case, the other kind of side of today's discussion that we want to discuss, which is what you do in a discussion,
That is
exemplified by Anthem. This is obviously not going to be a review of that game, as we haven't played it, but I've read a decent amount about it and watched stuff and, done my semi-due diligence as someone that's up on gaming stuff and just interested in the direction that big, huge games like this take. It seemed, when we were talking about, like, developer resources, right, so Anthem has been fraught, for the uninitiated, fraught with peril and problems upon release, which seems to just be the absolute norm nowadays.
unfortunately.
Boggles my mind. We were talking earlier, it actually, like, people are comparing it unfavorably to Destiny's release, which also boggles my mind, because Destiny's release was, like, just
a total mess.
Complete dumpster fire.
People might be sort of remembering that with a little bit, like...
I think we're starting to get there.
And because they did improve a lot of stuff after launch, I think people are forgetting just how bad Destiny was at launch.
I mean, both of them, 1 and 2.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 1 obviously had its own problems, to the point where they had to literally revoice an entire character, which is funny. And then, similarly, dude, 2 people were pissed about 2 when it came out.
Yeah.
Like, it was like the example of how not to do that, and now people are like... Anyway, point is, that's how bad it's been. And I think part of that might be a little bit unfair in terms of just... Destiny, I think, did tread new ground, and everyone's comparing it to Destiny. So there's some levels, I think, we're holding it to a higher standard, naturally.
Right.
And a lot of the critique has also been in terms of a lot of the technical, hardware aspects, in terms of the load times, the way that you can't, change your gear in-game in a looter shooter, which should sound absolutely ludicrous to you, stuff like that, and hasn't been quite as much on some of the other things that you would normally, if everything was working properly, like basic quality life crap.
Yeah.
The other stuff actually has been largely it's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it was okay.
And then the one outstanding part would be the presentation and even some of the feel of getting to play the game.
Yeah. And
so we were talking about it's bizarre that they nailed, in what my mind should be the really hard part.
Right.
Which was designing a an Iron Man simulator, getting satisfying gunplay down, and just staggering design and actually a solid story by all accounts, good voice acting, just a staggering presentation.
Well, so I have heard critiques in the sound design category, which I think makes sense from the audio that I've heard from the game. I don't have an intense sound system or anything, but decent headphones. And then I've also heard that some of the writing was in the dialogue,
especially for a BioWare standard story.
But the other things do seem to be well done. Like, I challenge anybody to say that it's not at least a good looking and, for the most part, a good feeling game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I also want to I was thinking about it as I was saying this stuff, that it reminded me of something in the back of my mind, which was actually the EA Battlefront games, which look just stupidly good.
Oh, yeah.
And also, the other notable one was that they sounded also just perfect. I mean, it was... I remember saying this actually back when it was coming out, and I was playing it and beginning to loathe it, but that it was still pretty much the single best... If you want to feel like you're in Star Wars, actually, again, and, you know, for a little bit before you realize the gameplay's crap, there's really something thrilling about playing that game and hearing the sounds and all that jazz. So I wonder if it's an EA thing. I will say the other thing that EA, or the Battlefront EA games were very, very heavily torn down for their basic gunplay and basic kind of gameplay that sucked, which I maintain. And Anthem has had, some issues as well in that regard, but also it's been praised for some of its actual gameplay too.
Yeah.
So what we were talking and thinking about just in broader sense as opposed to just getting into the game itself was just the fact, you brought this up, Mark, that now, if you count kind of Project Titan, which was the precursor to Overwatch,
right.
I think it's interesting, a little bit of symmetry that we just brought in, that failed because of scope, basically. Like they got it too big and didn't know what to do with it. That was literally, they said they couldn't make it fun. Right. And that's why they scrapped it. And then we have Destiny, and, there's obviously been hugely successful, but very rocky paths. And I think a lot of people would still maintain it's not quite there. I think they're getting closer after, 6 straight years of development since Destiny 1 or whatever. And now into Anthem, and it does seem like no one's actually nailed down how to do this.
Yeah.
Or if
I agree.
It can be done, at this point.
Me and Greg were watching... this Anthem review, and it feels like if you just watch this game that it feels like they're so close.
Yeah.
Right? When you watch the Destiny trailers and you saw the Destiny gameplay, you probably would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
And, that's possible that the people who were developing Project Titan felt the same way. And I've started to sort of question the idea that we are actually so close and started wondering if, this is a really good... fantasy, but not a real good reality. Basically,
maybe we can't do it.
It's something in our head says this is a great idea, but when you actually go to do it, it's not fun.
Yeah, as a game.
Yeah, and I don't know. I couldn't articulate why that is, but I'm just starting to wonder that because we've had 3 very big, experienced sci-fi shooter studios. I guess Blizzard was the exception there. Bungie and BioWare are sci-fi first-person shooter veterans, and they didn't get there.
Even farther, BioWare was third person, and Anthem's third person.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
So that even matches up better, and then obviously Destiny and Halo were both first.
First person. And so there's something missing, but I don't know if what's missing can actually be added, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And that was, I loved that thought, which was you were watching it and feeling the same way again, and instead of thinking, what are they missing, thought, what is everyone missing? Or maybe there's something, maybe they're actually not missing anything. Because you're right, at that point, all of the, EA, monetization, Activision for, Bungie, all the monetization aside, and I think it's interesting and also telling, like I said, the reason that Titan failed is because they couldn't make it fun. They probably could have put out Titan, something like this.
Oh yeah, exactly. And they just didn't want to.
And they decided not to.
Good for them.
Yeah, which says something about Blizzard. Again, put aside all of the monetization and crumminess or technical mishaps or launch or server or whatever. It might just be possible that a game like they are describing or dreaming of, kind of this forever game, this... MMO shooter hybrid, or the scale of it too. I think we were talking about just the size. This came back to something we've talked about, flying in games and some of the problems inherent in Anthem being a flying based game, that either A, you're out in this big open world and it feels empty, or the combat isn't fun because you can just literally fly away, or B, to make the combat fun, they just put you in places where you can't fly. Yeah. And there's like underground or in a tunnel, and you're like, oh well, that's kind of defeats the... Anyway.
That's what I was excited about, right? It's like flying around.
Kind of. So that's like a problem. But anyway, all that to say with the big... These kind of the future... All of these have been stupidly lucrative. I mean, Overwatch wasn't Titan, but, it was also a part of that. And another horrendously, disgustingly profitable venture. It does seem to be like a direction people are going. And that is... like I said, I don't know if there's been a time where... I've had that thought, which is not how can we eventually achieve this fantasy, but is this fantasy even possible? Because I feel like we're getting closer and closer to hardware. Constraints have to be getting lower and lower, right?
Right.
So if we could just run into the fact that it used to be that we couldn't just do all of our ideas. Now, if we can do all the ideas, we can actually find which ideas might just be bad ones,
or which ones aren't possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Not because they're limited, but because it doesn't work as a game as we understand games.
Right. Like, I challenge anybody to come up with an idea, a workable idea for an MMO RTS.
Yeah.
It's a staggeringly hard problem that nobody has even really tried to solve, from what I can tell. No large studio has tried to solve that.
To be fair, no one's even attempted because this one just makes sense.
That one, it's very obvious that it's like, it might not even at all be possible, just like conceptually.
Yeah.
And so, like, there are certain things that they sound cool, but you just can't actually do them. And I don't think that that MMO FPSs are like so far into that category, because obviously we can get pretty close. But I wonder if to really make it as compelling as everyone thinks it's going to be, it just can't really happen.
You know the closest thing to a MMO RTS is?
What?
It is the like 10,000 plus player ship battles in EVE Online. It's being a commander in one of those.
Yeah,
because they literally they have, I mean, they're different, like we've talked about EVE before, but like in those big battles they have like commanders that they don't pilot anything, they're literally just managing everyone, and the pilots do stuff. Like it's literally a chain of command. They're like admirals and like squadrons, and like the fleet leaders will make these big real-time decisions about where to go,
right,
and then everyone else will carry it out.
That's interesting.
So if you want a true MMO, like where everything that you build and everything, I mean, and over the span of months, right? But if you want like a permanent real world thing where you can build up forces and then eventually have them clash in real time, technically, as the only possible way I can do this. Anyway, I was just literally trying to think of that.
Yeah,
and then we're breaching definitions here, right? Because most people would consider that an MMO.
Yes, that's true. Not really an RTS.
Correct. So.
And I would contend that's a pretty different experience than playing your average RTS.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that is good for you for even coming up with an example.
Best I got.
But anyway, so I wonder if it sounds good. I don't doubt there are people who want to play these games. And there are people who Destiny has managed to basically satisfy. Like you said, there's still some things that people want, but it's actually gotten a lot better, and the people who are playing it like it.
Yeah.
My point isn't that people can't like this game. It's that the number of people this game appeals to seems to always vastly outpace the number of people who actually want to stick around and play it.
Yeah.
So there's something about this fantasy that's not being delivered on.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's interesting. We were talking earlier, too, about kind of the infection's a very negative way to put it, but the inclusion of MMO tendencies into like the modern shooter-looter genre, which is, usually can be thought about as MMO first-person shooter combinations.
Right.
That we've talked many times before about the MMO kind of differentiation between sandbox and theme park, and how so many more developer resources need to be put into a theme park game than a sandbox game, right? Also, if you're noting, this will also track pretty well with the Battle Royales, which are far more sandbox, right? And so developer time can go into the stuff like Fortnite can do to bring together all kinds of cool, fun things, and the mass chunk of the gameplay and experience is from the other players, which the developers don't have to do.
Yeah, and for people, just to catch people up, if you don't know the distinctions there, in a sandbox game, the content is mostly created by the players and through like organic inter-player interaction. Right. So in sandboxes, you want to give people tools and a place to play around, and then they make the game basically. Like Minecraft is an ultimate example of this.
Yep.
Obviously, these are on a spectrum.
Yep.
On the other side, you got theme park, and in a theme park, you give the player a set of experiences and you guide them through those experiences, and you hope that they have fun while they're doing it because this is all you have prepared.
It's a question.
Quest chains are a great example of this. World of Warcraft, mostly a theme park.
Most of the big MMOs actually did a pretty good job of that.
So just to give you an idea, these are the two sort of broad categories we're talking about. And you brought up a great point, which is that Fortnite seems to be toward the sandbox end.
Yeah.
And that, like, there are a set number of items, a set number of like tools and things you can play around with, but then you're just given this open space and you can kind of do what you want.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier, even on the cast, right? Was that was potentially a big appeal to people of the battle royale genre, which was just this wide open world, and whoever managed to use their wits and skill and grit to get through it won. Right? Now, games like Anthem and Destiny are very much on the theme park side, right? They require... It's an interesting problem because we were talking about, so like WoW is that's a 15-year-old game now, which is 2004, right?
Yeah.
Whew, that's great. 15 years old. And so obviously they've updated graphics and each expansion looks better, but it's still technically the same engine. So I have to imagine the amount of time and effort that goes into designing things is not quite comparable for building a WoW room to a Anthem one, right? In terms of just sheer level of detail, and I might be totally wrong about that because I don't understand making games. The mirroring of the big like draw for the looter shooter was bringing this previously completely, like, think about like MMOs from the very start, because of the fact that they had this huge multiplayer always online component, were really simple. Right, the commands were super, super simple. You see that all the way up to WoW, where it's a command bar and you hit things, and there's very little interaction that you can actually have with the world, right? Or it's a lot. It's not playing an action adventure game, and MMOs have tried to do that to varying levels of success. Now we've basically taken the ultimate, kind of very smooth, streamlined single player action mechanic, which is shooting,
right? And Halo,
yeah, exactly, and successfully put that into an MMO. Now, the problem with that is that all of those, like I said, all of the developer resources that were required. And again, remember that a theme park necessarily is going to require a stupid amount of content to keep a player base moving. Because it can only come from the developers in large part.
Yeah, if developers aren't adding anything, then there's nothing new to do.
Correct. And also note the absolutely rapacious pace of gamers and their ability to consume content. All this put together means that you have a system in a looter shooter that is, if it's going to be theme park, and it kind of has to be, because of the way that action games are set up, anything that's plot driven, you have this incredibly difficult problem where you cannot give them enough to actually keep them going in the way that a proper like single player story based shooter would be able to do. And so then you tack on the looter part of it, but that's going to be half-baked as well because you have so much more development time put into the need to make these AAA polished games feel and play like what used to be just a single, like they put all their development time into just making a shooter.
Yeah.
I have to make a shooter and an entire loot-based grind system, which is actually really hard to do.
But I also think that it's kind of inevitable, right? Like, we've talked about looting and loot tables as being a way to extend a game that's sort of thin on content, right? You can crank those numbers as low as you want, make the drop rates super tiny, people will grind for them. That way...
people will get tired, though, too.
Yes, people will get tired. No, absolutely.
If it's too low, like it's not...
But I only say that because I think looter shooter is not an accident. Because it is so... It might be so labor intensive to add new areas because they have to be massive.
Right.
Because you're talking about gunplay, and then in Anthem you're talking about flying suits. Right? So the amount of coverage and ground that you have to deal with is huge to begin with. So adding new areas has got to be difficult.
Yeah.
It kind of helps give players something to do to have that much loot. Now that kind of ended up becoming the game is just getting loot, which I don't think that necessarily has to be the goal. But it is interesting, as I think about, well, what tools have you given people in a game like Anthem, right? We've given people guns, and if you gave people guns and just the ability to do whatever they wanted, wouldn't it just turn into a battle royale sort of thing?
Right.
I mean, you'd have to have respawn mechanics and stuff because you aren't actually doing single elimination stuff.
Oh, you mean talking about PvP?
Yeah, kind of. Basically, the more sandbox elements I introduce into a game like Anthem in my head, the more it starts to resemble something like a battle royale.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, what if you could pick up weapons temporarily and just use them for a while, but then it would become the fight over the best weapons with other people.
Yeah, and it loses the. And so it's interesting. There's. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, it seems like it's hard to kind of get away from that theme park without just sort of completely dumping it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, like I said, kind of going back to what you were saying in terms of, I don't know if there's a solution to this necessarily in terms of design space, and if there is, then people will make, hundreds of millions of dollars off it, and it's not going to be two guys sitting in their living room. But the fact that, you have no PvP in Anthem, and then Destiny has multiple layers, right? They have, obviously the end game is all, grind, right? That's just the shooter looter part. But they also put a unnecessarily, and we've talked about the Destiny storyline and all of its problems, but in general, actually an incredibly deep universe, and I think very engaging, excellent sci-fi universe and story that people can get involved with. And then we actually just checked the numbers before the cast, and more people play the Crucible, which is the PvP mode, than is currently doing the grind.
PvE, yeah.
So, again, going back to a game, if you're going to cater to a massive player base, you need to give them a lot of different things to do. Then Destiny is trying to do that, at least in small part. Now, again, the segmentation of the player base is going to play a big part in that. And aforementioned problems with looter shooters as opposed to the sandbox of a battle royale. But the other big problem with Anthem is, as far as we can tell, there's actually almost literally zero of that. There's the one really straightforward. The story is like lackluster and short. I've already talked about how that's not really a way that you can keep on. At that point, you just do a story-based game, right? If you really want to invest in that as the thing that keeps your players going. And past that, it's just a lot of kind of grindy repetition in terms of the action content. So obviously they will have expansions and DLC to be added on, but outside of all just the problems of a bad launch and bad press, it does seem like part of that secret sauce that we were talking about, or hypothesizing about anyway, of being able to cater to wildly different types of people is very much lacking in Anthem, which is so important when you're talking, again, like, I will say there is a level of, I'm sure it's just greed, but there's also a level of, like, this idea of having this forever game is I mean, that's ballsy, right? That's like a big, that's reaching for the stars. It's ambitious. That's pushing limits, you know, not just sitting back on our laurels.
Right.
That's a very ambitious design space to enter into. And yeah, if you're going to have that level of ambition, you better have more than what Anthem seems to have launched with, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also I wonder about that definition of forever game. Like, is WoW considered a forever game? Because if you're trying to, like, have more longevity than WoW, I mean,
I would argue WoW is the low forever game, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. Otherwise, I don't know if it's possible. Right?
So far, you know?
Like, it's the longest running, like, super popular game that I can think of.
Well, still being updated, no less, like, right? You know,
yeah,
it's not just like, you know, like people are going to be playing
Melee or whatever.
Counter-Strike until the end of time.
Yeah, sure.
Or Melee, yeah. But no, WoW is actively coming out with new content.
Yeah.
And it's technically the exact same game as was released in 2004. So yeah, I think that's probably the goal in a lot of ways.
So when you were talking, I thought about, like, this sort of the strategy the spectrum we've outlined with sandboxes, theme parks. So in a theme park, the experience is what gets people coming back, right? They want to have more of the story or of the set pieces or the big battles or the dungeon raids.
Just the visceral feel of playing the game.
Right. Yeah. So that's what they want more of. In the sandbox, what you want more of is more player interaction, creativity. You're not limited by the number of choices that you can make, and so new things they always exist in the game. It's only limited by your creativity, right? So it's like a piece of blank paper. The only limit is your imagination, right? So it sounds cheesy, but that's basically how they work.
Yeah.
And so this is interesting because it seems like the thing that they want to be driving player behavior and player return is loot.
Right.
Right, it's not an experience, and it's not other player interaction, it's just items.
Yeah.
And we've seen that strategy played out before in games like Diablo 3, specifically, is what I have experience with.
Good.
And I don't know that too many people cared about the story of Diablo 3.
Well, so that's...
Specifically 3.
That's an interesting conversation. Yeah, want to just have the Diablo conversation that we had, basically?
Yeah, let's do it.
Because, Mark brought up another excellent point, which was thinking about the closest analogy we have, at least in terms of direct experience. And I have, easy 200 plus hours on Diablo 3. So I have at least 140 on my Barbarian's Fergenkirk.
Oh my god.
Which was the very beginning of Mark and I's playing a game together. Kind of the question of, like, could Diablo 3 even exist today? And the reasons that Diablo 3 did work so well, in terms of, again, that was fraught with a lot of troubles at launch. Took a long time to get where it needed to be. At the same time, it's also one of the top 10 best-selling games in history, which is insane.
Yes, yeah.
And feels kind of wrong in some ways, but... and the differences between that and, what Anthem is, or what Destiny is, or what seems like the direction even of scale would be. And I had the thought for Diablo, they were riding very high on one of the most successful PC games of all time at that point, which was Diablo 2, and a lot of people came back specifically for that.
Right.
And we said the Diablo 3 story sucked, but people were furious about it because they cared so much about the story.
Yeah.
So the question, did people care about the story, is like, yes, actually.
Initially, they did.
Yeah, but only long enough to be really angry about it, and then it is now regarded very poorly.
Yeah.
Particularly the base game. The Rebirth Souls was better lauded.
Interestingly, like I wonder if there's been like kind of a misreading of the Diablo story, right? Like looking at the current Diablo experience, somebody might look at that and say, well, these games can be are pretty successful. Like look at all the people, they've got the seasonal thing going, people log in, they still want to play it, they invest their time in it, so it must be worth making.
I wonder how Diablo's still doing.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to get like a player count, but you have to realize that before they got there, they had a total mess of a game where a lot of people were very unhappy who had bought the game and already installed it.
I see where you're going with this.
And so, like...
that worked in, like, 2012.
Yeah, well,
so
like...
it's they got
They got a bunch of people on the game... They got upset. They had a bunch of bad PR. They changed some things and improved it, and now people log in sometimes to play. Right? That's very different. They already have it installed, right? Yeah. It's like I already bought the game, and they're giving me free new content. I might as well check it out. Yeah. And like I don't doubt. Yes, I'm sure there are hardcore Diablo players out there, but I think to look at Diablo's numbers and say like this is the number of people who will buy a new game like this might be wrong.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Particularly in terms of the difference in like I was talking about with. Even with Anthem at this point, how I think part of the backlash against it has been just an increase in standard based on the fact that this genre is becoming a thing, or even the fact, like you said, Destiny 2 is actually at a decent point.
The genre of games that come out terribly, but then slowly improve until the point where some people play them.
Well, it's games as a service, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the absolute, without being too cynical, I honestly, if I sound cynical on cast, this is me trying to, like, balance it out as best I can. You should hear me off of it. But there's like no possible way that model of like capitalism and economy could not result in our current situation. The idea of a game as a service that you are selling as something is going to be like that it makes it. Yeah, the reason that there's bug tests like there's game crashing bugs at release now is 100% logical. It almost has to be that way, in my opinion. But that's a larger conversation. That I haven't thought through a whole ton and don't want to make a fool of myself discussing on air.
Well, it is interesting to think, like, if you're going to make a game as a service, who are you tailoring the service to? Right? That becomes immediately your question. And the answer for anybody releasing a game might be like, well, whoever plays it, right? Then you sort of take the loudest voices in that community and you sort of start to make your game toward what they want it to be.
Right.
You might alienate a large number of people. You end up with a satisfied player base, but you also end up with a much smaller player base than you started with. So you sort of just winnow away anybody who doesn't quite agree with whoever the loudest people are in the community, and you end up with a weird, like, self-selecting group of people who are stuck with this game now.
You know what I just remembered? Remember esports? Remember those exist?
Remember guns?
Yeah, you know? No. Dude, like, none of the giant releases in the past couple of years have been esports.
No, they haven't.
You know?
Yeah, the last big esport release, at least game that was marketed as an esports release that I can remember was the Quake update.
I mean, they tried to push PUBG a little bit. And obviously Fortnite can be played competitively.
Yeah. Is it, though?
I don't know, actually.
I'm
sure there's got to be. I mean, it's the most popular game in the world. Anyway, but it's not like esport-y, right? Like, it's not in the same way like a MOBA is esport. Like, you have to learn League of Legends, right? Or even like Overwatch having like a competitive league built into it, you know? Or them trying to do that. I don't know how successful that still is. But anyway, I was just thinking, again, in broader terms of like a player base, because it's a conversation that comes up a lot when you're trying to balance a competitive game with a giant player base, which is the balance of the competition. When there's money involved, has to be a certain thing, but the problem is most people aren't that good at it, and it's in the same way, so the balance has to be different for part of the player base, and you either alienate part of it or make it a balanced competitive sport.
Right.
Obviously, we're not running into those problems with these games, but it's a similar thing, you know? Like,
yeah, you're listening to a select group of people to the exclusion of others.
Let's go back to Diablo.
Okay. And
the launch of 3, because like you're saying, the wrong lesson was learned.
Yeah.
By the fact that, like you said, it was launched as this, again, just trailer fire of a game that people were really unhappy with in a lot of ways, and now has, you know, after 7 years, become, and that's interesting that we can talk about the game in these time frames now. I feel like that's also a new thing, right? Yeah. Games didn't used to be supported that way. It would be like 3 games in at this point. They just would have made another. And people have said that about wanting Diablo 4, but regardless, we're in a very different way of being able to distribute games.
Yeah, and update them.
Exactly. And like I said, now Diablo 3 is actually it's like looked upon like fondly, grandfatherly, and like, oh yeah, it's an excellent example of the genre.
People know what they're getting when they play Diablo 3.
Yeah, totally.
And people didn't know what they were getting when they started to play Anthem, right? Yeah. And so I think that, again, there might be just some truth to the people who are playing Diablo. Well, of course they like it. They knew what they were going to be playing.
They're going to be playing Diablo anyway.
Right. I mean, the people who didn't like Diablo when it came out thought it was going to be, a continuation of a story that they loved. They thought it was going to be, dark and gritty in the way that Diablo 2 was. Like
horrifying and on the ground and gothic and claustrophobic. And
so those people were all disappointed and they left.
Right.
And maybe they came back, but I think, again, if they did, it was just because they already bought it anyway.
Right.
But then there was a new group of people that was attracted by this game, because if it's a game that people...
The sheer smoothness of the gameplay, and all the reasons that it...
All the feel, right? Which is the stuff we're talking about with Anthem, right? It's like, well, it feels good.
Yeah.
And if it feels good, I wonder if some people will find it and like what it has to offer, which is
really good at there. Which, I mean, again, it's such a interesting as we keep on coming up with these examples of Destiny and Anthem and No Man's Sky. I mean, No Man's Sky is a similar place. I don't even checked in with that game. I saw a retrospective on it recently.
Tons of updates.
They did a whole 2.0 thing, and again, people are actually like, hey, this is actually a pretty good game.
Right.
It is now. I mean, obviously that was the example of a bad game, but it's also 4 years later. Mm-hmm. That it's now finally kind of gotten to a good point. Similarly, like I said, Destiny as a concept, Destiny 1 and 2 are really similar, so you can kind of count them all as one long continuous evolution of the same game. Mm-hmm. And when Destiny 1 came out, 2014, I mean, Bungie, outside of the development they did on Destiny, which was insane, they took years, 3 or 4 years to do that.
Yeah.
They've been molding this system with a stupid amount of people to help, actual player feedback for almost 6 years. Mm-hmm. And they're just now starting to get to a point where people aren't just screaming about how bad Destiny 2 is.
Yeah.
So it could just be, it could be just a level of complication where we have such a complex system and we just need more time to fine tune it now because it's just too big.
I think that's possible.
But I feel like there's got to be a whole lot of things where that's not true for too. Games that have been successful that aren't like that.
Well, it's definitely true that we are attempting games on a greater scale than we have in the past.
Yeah.
I do think that there's some problem with the way that these games are pitched. It's easy to be able to look at Diablo and then say that you know what you're getting because Diablo's around, you can find footage of it online, you can read about all sorts of descriptions, right? You know it's a known quantity. For a game to advertise itself like No Man's Sky, there are certain types of games which may advertise much better, significantly better than they sell.
Yeah.
And when you find one of those games, you're going to get a lot of negative feedback, right? Because people don't even know what they're upset about. They know that the advertising made them feel a certain way, and then they get into the game and they don't feel that way, and they want their money back, right? And they're upset, and they want the developers to fix something, and they're going to give them 101 things to fix because they don't even know what they don't like about it. Right? Which is, we talked about this on our immersion episode, just that, people are notoriously bad at saying what it is that they actually like about a game.
Yeah.
And that, the word immersion can often be it can be hiding a lot of things that people like.
Yeah.
Similarly, people being frustrated and telling you to fix your game can be hiding a lot of things that they don't like. And one of the things they might not like is being really disappointed because they were promised a certain fantasy through a trailer, which is, as we've talked about, an extremely different medium than playing a game.
Right.
Watching a video couldn't be more different than interacting with something on screen. And I don't think the answer to this is to just don't advertise, but I think that's what we're rubbing up against, at least partially, is that it's hard to convey what these games are going to be like just through footage.
Well, a great example of, an excellent, timely example of that is a nice way to tie everything together. A game that recently hit 50 million subscribers. Apex launched with 0 advertising. That was the other crazy thing. They didn't even announce it was happening. There was no hype. Then maybe they released a trailer. I think they might just released.
Yeah.
And obviously that worked.
I think it's brilliant. I applaud them for
exactly.
that.
Awesome. Well, no, I mean, you were talking about before, the advertising for Anthem was insane. Obviously, Destiny had, Nathan Fillion and all these top tier, actually good voice actors and all this super high level marketing campaigns, and that will sell games, but I think that also leaves people, you say you're selling something very different than a game with those trailers.
Yeah.
And Apex did not try to do that even a little bit, and I do wonder, it'd be fascinating, obviously there's so many other things you could do with something like this, but if you go back in time, the exact same game, and put an advertising campaign in front of it over 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, something like that. Get
and
a nice
see
hype
what
cycle
happens.
going.
It's such a double-edged sword, right? Because everyone's going to be already comparing it to Fortnite before it's even out. People are going to get all these preconceived notions.
Yep.
And then when it launches, it's not just the launch. People aren't taking it at face value and playing it. They're totally they already know what they think about the game.
And the game already exists in their head.
Exactly. They have no possibility to do that. To learn what that game was, you had to play the game.
Right.
Upon launch. Obviously now it's blown up and you can watch, but anyway, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very different way of doing it.
So explosively. And quickly too.
I'm not surprised that it can succeed though. I don't understand why people think that you have to advertise.
Yeah.
We used to not advertise games that much, at all.
Yeah.
Right? When I was growing up, which sounds like a long time ago, but I grew up with Super Nintendo, and did I see the occasional commercial for a game? Probably.
Yeah.
But they don't stick out in my head. I don't remember watching commercials of most of the games that I bought.
Yeah.
And the reason I learned that they were good is because you hear about them being good.
Yeah.
And gamers talk to each other, and gamers talk to each other more than they ever have, right? With Twitch streaming and all sorts of online communication, people can collect around whatever game or game type they like.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why there's such a focus on a hype cycle when if a game is good and people genuinely like playing it, they have an easy way of discovering it.
I think it means that you don't have to make as good a game to make the same amount of money.
Yes, that does seem possible.
Because if Apex Legends wasn't good, it wouldn't have worked. Right? Everyone can agree outside of its longevity that it is... I remember even seeing a lot of reviewers saying that it's actually felt like this is the best version of Battle Royale that's out right now. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of the pure kind of expression of that type of game mode. Mm-hmm. It's the best one. So obviously it doesn't work if the game is no good.
It doesn't.
And so it's a way bigger risk for investors and all that jazz. Because like you said, you can put out a mediocre game like Anthem, and I don't know what the sales points are on it, but probably not bad.
Yeah.
I guess. It was beautiful enough. I remember watching it, and if I hadn't known that it was EA and have my ear to the ground about this sort of thing, I'd be like, that looks really cool. And if I was in the place to be buying games, there's a lot of ifs here. If I wasn't me and I did like bad games, then I would have bought that game. No, it looks really, it would not be hard to get someone to want to buy that game.
No, and I don't think it was hard. Yeah. And I think you're right that there's probably a marketing component to this whole dynamic we're talking about, right? People who spent a lot of money up front to build this game want to know that it's going to do well.
Right.
And, what surefire marketing strategy is advertising.
So where does this leave us? I was kind of thinking in terms of we were thinking about just the direction of the future of
multiplayer shooters.
Kind of. We were talking about the big broad two areas of theme park and sandbox, with sandbox being so well exemplified by battle royales right now, mm-hmm. and the theme park experience being outside of the true kind of theme park of. And also, I don't want to. Single player is actually doing great right now. 2018 was one of the best years for single player games in a long time in mm-hmm. terms of. Near Autonoma, we had God of War, Spider-Man. Before that, we had Horizon Zero Dawn. There's a lot. Red Dead, obviously. Mm-hmm. Plenty of good single-player games coming out right now. But in terms of the extrapolation of that idea of forever theme park, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the looter shooter, and that seems to be in a far dicier area.
Yeah, to me, it's just an oxymoron. Forever theme park is just. Yeah. All you're doing as a developer when you set out to make a game like that is saddling yourself with an infinite amount of work you can never deliver on.
That doesn't sound fun?
No, it doesn't sound fun. I don't know why
you want to design games?
You can make a limited experience that's fun in a theme park.
Yeah, that's the thing about theme parks. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah, you can only spend so much time at a theme park.
Yeah,
right?
We've run into that.
Where the sandbox is a little bit more like your life.
Yeah.
So, which you can only spend so much time there too, but it's a bit more.
You can just lay in the grass and look at the stars at night,
or just play soccer.
Yeah,
or a little bit,
or tennis if the grass is short enough.
That's a great place for us to end.
Yeah, I think we got it. That's it.
That's it.
Right
That's
there.
the point we wanted to come away with.
We've done a podcast.
I feel like we've been over a few different places in this podcast, but I definitely like the parallel between Fortnite and sort of it being more sandboxy, where people have some choice over the experience they want to have in the game. The two major categories obviously being sort of looting and scavenging and trying to get the swag, mm-hmm. and the other category being competing and winning and killing people and being strategic, right? Yeah. So they at least have the choice between those two experiences, and then obviously we just give them an arena where people can just run around and do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And Anthem,
there's also extra sandbox tools there too, in terms of just the building mechanics of.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point.
You know? Like
that's
that is another thing that
the
differentiates
definition of
it.
sandbox.
Which is continually is adding in a little bit of Minecraft basically.
Right.
Some pre-built Minecraft that you can put in.
So maybe that would be an interesting direction to take our Anthem discussion. A building mechanic. I don't know, but maybe
add in some Subnautica. That could be interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Like that gives you something to do in terms of the big open world. The world could feel less empty if you're actually crafting, or even obviously this would need an upgrade to the engine, but being able to like build. I mean, this gets actually what we're talking about now. This is Fallout 76. Yeah. It's funny. I forgot about it. In all of our discussion, we didn't even come.
I know. I didn't think about it.
Really, I didn't. That one tanked so hard that we didn't even come up against it when we were talking about this failure of melding single player and
first-person shooter multiplayer.
Sorry, Fallout.
Well, there's lots more discussions here as always, which is why we have a podcast talking about this stuff. So, if you have thoughts, questions about any of the games we discussed, or ideas about how to make MMO first-person shooters not just like Battle Royale games, let us know.
And also
you can email Muxl at gergandmuxl.com or Gerg at gergandmuxl.com. That'll get to me or Gerg respectively.
Both of those are true.
And
you guys have an excellent week.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.